Hey peers, welcome back to the Modern Myths Podcast. I'm Vince Ventura, your host for the Modern Myths Podcast and artistic director of 12 Piers Theater. This week we're going to do a question and answer session for Spiraling by Judith Pratt, so let's jump right in with the first question. Why would we choose such a visual play to present as a podcast? And I think this is a great question. So with this podcast series, we are hoping to provide a platform for playwrights to take these plays and submit to other companies in the future. So we didn't want to necessarily be limited by what you would see on stage. We trust you guys, we trust our audience enough to do some of the heavy lifting with the visual work. It is a very visual play when you're talking about masks and labyrinths, but I also think this play at its core is a relationship play about three women, really. And it's also about how we deal with the myth of our own life, and also what these masks mean for the cycle of life for a woman specifically. I think that's really why we picked this play. It's less about presenting the play visually and more about what the play has to say about myth and how it contributes to a new global myth. The next question we got a lot of, with this play specifically, and Judith and I touched on it last week in our interview, is why are masks important in ritual and in theater? This question could have a podcast to itself. Masks are extremely important in ritual, dating back before the Egyptian period. There's a talk of priests embalming bodies wearing the mask of Anubis because only Anubis was able to embalm the body. So in that respect, the priest then became Anubis by wearing the mask. And I think that's reflected quite a bit in Spiraling. The women who wear the masks actually become the figure that the mask depicts, and in some ways learn something about themselves in the process. And I think that's really been a ritual function of masks since masks were invented. You almost lose your own identity. The ego almost takes a back seat when you're wearing a mask, and the character or the identity of the mask itself almost takes over. There's a certain freedom in that, a freedom to be someone who, might be closer to who we really are, or might be very different, but the freedom to express that and to experience that whenever our identity is hidden or subdued. That's a big part of how masks are used in ritual as well. It can help us tap into a sort of larger identity when we wear masks in a ritual setting. In theater, they were used for a number of reasons, from letting audience members know who the characters were in the first place, especially when you're in an outdoor amphitheater in broad daylight. It can be hard to see from that far away. And they also were used for amplification purposes in their traditional sense. And this is before electricity, of course. We're talking Greek theater. And again, you're very far away in an outdoor amphitheater, and sound can get dissipated very quickly. So these masks served as a sort of microphone system for the actors as well, and for the audiences to be able to hear the actors. So apart from a functional purpose, they also had a ritual purpose in the sense that it let the actor channel another sort of energy. And in college preparation programs, I know at Point Park University, where I attended, the mask work there was very much in that line of thought. We would do mask work with elements, and water, earth, air, and fire, really keying into what the energy of the mask itself was and letting that resonate throughout the body, because the actor also doesn't have the benefit of using their facial expression when they're wearing the mask. They rely on the mask and then on their physicality in the body as well. It's a very good question, and I think those two questions go hand in hand, because if this were a full production, you would get to see the actor physically embody the mask. The next question we wanted to tackle here today was, what does Joseph Campbell have to do with Spiraling, other than being name-dropped there towards the end? And I think that Joseph Campbell plays a lot into what I'm trying to accomplish with 12 Piers Theater and with this Modern Myths podcast. Joseph Campbell had a great realization, and I'm not sure he was the first one to have it, but he certainly took it and ran, that all myths are essentially telling a very similar story. Culturally, we might not even interpret them in the same way, but the myth and the structure of the story is very similar. He called it a monomyth. So when Meredith starts talking about co-opting other religions and trying to piece together your own happiness out of it, she's saying it in a negative way, but I think Joseph Campbell would call that following your bliss. There's something to be said for these stories in the way they can instruct our lives. They help us transition from childhood into engaging the world as an adult and then retreating from the world when it comes time to retire. These stories can really help us transition through difficult periods or help us feel empowered during victorious periods or give us some comfort whenever we're down and out. So I think Joseph Campbell plays into spiraling right at the core of the theme of the play, which is how do we engage with this world in a positive way? What's our guide? What's our model for engaging with this world, even when it's tough, even when it hurts? And I think at the end of the play, that's kind of where Jill and Meredith come to. It's, you could fight and beat your head against a wall and do things that make you not all that happy, or you could find out what makes you truly happy. Find where your bliss lives, and you can run with it. And I think that's what Joseph Campbell is saying, and I think that's what Judith is driving at in this play. And I think that's what Emma discovers, and I think that's what Jill discovers. And I hope and I suspect that after this play is over, that that's what Meredith discovers as well. So there are a lot of women in powerful positions, women in the sciences, women in historically underrepresented fields for women, historically male-dominated fields in this play. And talking with Judith, it seems like her other plays as well. So we had a question, and this actually came from someone on staff here at 12 Piers Theater. What does it mean to have all of these women in such male-dominated positions? What does this say about spiraling? What does this say in terms of being a reflection of what's going on in society? It's almost difficult for me to answer it as a male artistic director. I don't want to sound misogynistic or surprised that there are women in powerful positions in this play, because I think that there's no reason that there shouldn't be women in powerful positions. I think it's interesting because traditionally, perhaps it wouldn't have been written that way. Perhaps Emma would have been a male character. It's definitely unusual for a 19th century explorer to be a female, or a 19th century anthropologist to be female. Certainly not unheard of. I think that we chose to produce this play not only because of how it speaks to our mission of finding a new global myth, but it also shows our commitment to producing female playwrights and works with good roles for female actors. We wanted to make sure our podcast season was very balanced this year and gave extra attention to making sure that there were enough female playwrights represented. And I think that, if nothing else, the gender of these characters goes hand in hand with our initiative to make sure we had a balanced season. What about the use of labyrinths in spiraling and the use of labyrinths in myth? This is such a cool question. By far, hands down, my favorite myth is the myth of the labyrinth and the Minotaur. Hands down. Because we all have that beast lurking within us at the center of the labyrinth. The labyrinth in spiraling, again, is a huge mythic symbol that is almost representative of self-discovery. Jill walking these labyrinths is a way for her to meditate, a way for her to work out what comes next for her, to find her bliss so that she can then go follow it. If you look at the story of Theseus and Ariadne, or Minos and the Minotaur, these stories are about going into the labyrinth, finding yourself, becoming self-actualized, finding your way back out, and achieving your bliss. Essentially, the labyrinth in the story of the Minotaur and the labyrinth in spiraling serve a very similar purpose. I think that is one of the neatest things that Judith has done with this play, and one of the most tangible mythic symbols that we have here, maybe even in the whole season, this season, for modern myths. Here's a question that we ask every time we select a play, be it for our main stage productions live here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or if we're going to broadcast them on the internet. We always take the time to ask how this play fits 12 Piers' mission. 12 Piers' mission is to produce work both digitally and in live performance that contributes to or helps discover a new global myth. Spiraling, I truly believe, couldn't fit our mission statement any better. Not only does it contribute to a new global myth with the completely fictional Duamuapue tribe, but it also tells us how to use myth in a very meta way, in a way that we can go home and read anything from the Greeks, or if you want to go Sumerian or Egyptian, whatever it is, we can read it with a more educated eye and see how those myths can affect us in practicum. What's really interesting about searching for a new set of myths is that humanity is desperate for it. If you look around, you see shared continuity and shared universes cropping up all over television, film. I have to give Marvel a lot of credit. But as groundbreaking as it might seem, we've been doing this for thousands of years. You could take a look at all of the stories that take place on Mount Olympus and look at it as Marvel's Shared Universe Volume 3.0, because you have the Sumerians and the Egyptians before that, and you have plenty of other mythologies and myth sets that happen after that. The difference, I think, and it's hard for me to speak to this not having been present in ancient Greece, is that we understand that our myths are fiction today. And I think that gives us, if we're mindful of it, a much more useful tool. Because if we realize these myths are fiction, if we realize they're reflections of ourself, then we can use them. Then they become a set of guideposts for living a fulfilled life. Well, peers, that's all the time we have this week. Make sure you tune in next week for my chat with Michael Amon and a sneak preview of his play Caliban. We're going to air that all in one part the week following. Then we're going to catch up with the rest of that interview with me and Michael. And then we're going to have another Q&A like this, so be sure to get your questions in on Facebook and Twitter. We'll see you next week with that interview with Michael Amon. The Modern Myths podcast is produced by 12 Piers Theatre. Executive producer Vince Ventura. Producers Sarah Fisher, Matt Henderson, and Marcus Savage. Dramaturg Abigail Caddy. Spiraling was directed by Ingrid Sonishin. Meredith, played by Virginia Wall Grunert. Jill, played by Erica Cuenca. Emma, played by Kara Ronzetti. Stage directions read by James Fitzgerald. Recording location generously provided by Carnegie Mellon University. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review.